It's my pleasure to introduce Richard Heinberg, who will help us to open up the program. Richard Heinberg is an American journalist and educator who has written extensively on energy, economic, and ecological issues, including oil depletion. He is the author of 14 books and hundreds of essays and articles. He is presently serving as the senior fellow at the Post-Carbon Institute, and he is regarded as one of the world's foremost advocates for a shift away from our current reliance on fossil fuels. He has delivered hundreds of lectures on energy and climate issues to audiences on 6 continents, addressing policymakers at many levels, from local city councils to members of the European Parliament. In addition, he wrote and narrated Post-Carbon Institute's animated video, 300 Years of Fossil Fuels in 300 Seconds, winner of YouTube's Do-Gooder 2011 Video of the Year Award, which has been viewed by nearly 2 million people and translated into multiple languages. We are very pleased to welcome him here today. And Richard will give his remarks, and then we'll have space for Q&A. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Jess. And I'll share my screen here. Okay, so over the next 20 minutes, what I hope to do is walk us through an overview of the human predicament in the 21st century. So this is a big picture context, so that we're kind of all on the same page, and it's a big picture that I've been working on for about 50 years. So I'm happy to share it, and I'm happy to have questions afterward, and your comments too. So the context that I like to put everything in is the context of power, because power is everything. In the simplest meaning, a physicist would say power is the rate of energy transfer. Okay, but what do we do with energy? Well, everything we do. So the ability to do something is power. We speak of the power of flight, the power of speech, and so on. But when we talk about power, we're also concerned with social power. So if power is the ability to do something, social power is the ability to get someone else to do something. And we humans have become not only the world's physical power champions, but also social power. We've been developing social power in various ways for tens of thousands of years. We have horizontal social power, where we just self-organize to do things. And we also have vertical social power, which is based on incentives and threats. It's a kind of, when I say vertical, it's a kind of pyramid of power with a few people at the top telling lots of other people what to do. But power is not just human, it's everywhere. It's a thread that ties together basically everything in the universe and everything in life, everything in ecosystems. So if you want to understand something, follow the power. Sometimes people say, well, follow the money. Yeah, but money is just a proxy for power. And it's why pay attention to the proxy when you can follow the real thing? Life is incredibly powerful. When I was doing research for my book, Power, I was astounded to find that gram for gram, the average organism is 10,000 times as powerful as the sun. How could that be? Well, do the math. Of course, life is getting its power from the sun primarily. There's a few minor exceptions. And the sun is generating its own power, but nevertheless, living things are extraordinarily adept as a result of the evolutionary processes over long periods of time, extraordinarily adept at gathering and exerting power in order to survive and do the things they want to do. And as I said earlier, humans have become really the power champions as a result, especially of a few achievements and developments we've made over the last, really tens of thousands of years. The ability to control and make fire gave us the ability to do all kinds of things, including control environments, change environments so that the kinds of plants and animals that we wanted would grow there. Tools, all kinds of tools, clothing to enable us to live in places that we wouldn't otherwise inhabit, and language especially, which enabled us to communicate to one another across space and time to coordinate our behavior. So up until roughly 10,000 years ago, human societies were operating mostly by horizontal power, everybody just cooperating together to do the things they needed to do. But since about, again, 8 to 10,000 years ago, we've seen the development of more vertical social power in human societies, primarily the result of grain agriculture, which enabled the accumulation of surpluses of food that could be stored a long time, which were then objects of raid from other groups of people. So war becomes a big catalyst in the ramping up of competition between societies. And then the development of the state about 6,000 years ago was really a crucial juncture, because from that point on, we get the development of money, metal weapons, communication technologies, and social complexity, full-time division of labor, including slavery. So society has never been the same since. 6,000 years is an eye blink in the time that human beings have been around, but it's been a very fateful period of time. Now, since we've had state-based societies with cities, money, and all these other things, we've seen the tendency for societies to arise and collapse. And social scientists who've studied this, especially in the last 10, 20 years, using big databases of quantitative information about hundreds of human societies, have come to pretty much agree that collapse is kind of a normal periodic feature of these kinds of societies. So we go from 6,000 years ago up to fairly recently, and we get a gradual accumulation of more and more wealth, societies getting larger, more powerful, but then something happens that nobody could have predicted that changes everything, and that's the advent of fossil fuels. It required some prior developments, private ownership of natural resources, protections for investors, and so on. But once those things appeared, it became possible for humans to start extracting and using fossil fuels. And this changed everything, because fossil fuels were enormously concentrated sources of energy developed by nature over the course of tens of millions of years that we could extract relatively easily and use them for all kinds of purposes. This is what agriculture looked like before fossil fuels. This is what agriculture looks like with fossil fuels. So you notice a lot more people here than here. It used to take 90% of the population to produce enough food to feed everyone, including, maybe that 10% who would live in cities and take on specialized occupations, doctors and lawyers and soldiers and writers and all the rest. And everybody else was farmers. But with fossil fuels, it only takes 1 or 2% of the population working full-time at agriculture to feed everybody else. So guess what? The biggest demographic trend of the last 100 years has been urbanization, people moving to the cities and taking jobs in the middle class. But this is, I use this little graph from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, farm jobs as a percentage of total U.S. jobs. And that tells some of the picture, but the use of the word jobs is really, it hides more than it reveals, because did 90% of the people in the US have farm jobs in 1790? No, they were small landholders or big landholders in the South with plantations, or they were enslaved persons. Very few people had farm jobs. The whole idea of employment having a salary or hourly wages. This is recent stuff. I mean, you can find examples going back in history, but the idea that, most people would live that way would be totally alien to somebody in the 1790s. So we've developed this thing called the economy as a result of fossil fuels. And this is a picture of the economy from Investopedia. And I added the little question at the bottom, what's missing here? Producers, consumers? Well, that's it, right? Well, where does all the stuff come from that we manufacture and sell? It comes from the earth. So the whole idea that there are limited natural resources and limited waste sinks doesn't even come into conventional economic theory. Of course, they have to make room for it occasionally just because it's so obvious, but it's not part of the worldview of most economists. So we've developed the idea that the economy should always grow. Because of fossil fuels, the economy has grown with more and more cheap energy, concentrated energy. We've been able to do more things. We become more powerful, and there are more of us. So this, the economy grows, and we look at that. Economists look at that and they say, well, that is normal, that's natural. But what does economic growth actually mean? Anything that's growing at a certain percentage rate over time has a doubling time. If it's growing at 1% per year, it doubles in size every 70 years, at 2% every 35 years, and so on. So economists say, well, the economy should grow at 2 to 3% per year. That's just normal. That's natural. That's what we should aim for. But that means the economy doubles in size about every 25 years. So every 25 years, we use twice as much raw materials. We produce twice as much waste. That's insane. And yet that insanity is taken as absolutely normal. This is global energy consumption or usage, again, since around 1800. And you can see what an incredible ride it's been. I was born in 1950. And as you can see, right around 1950, there's an inflection point where we really started using a lot more oil. And from about 1950 to about 1975 was the period of the fastest economic growth in all of human history, by far. It was also a period of the fastest growth in population and GDP. And, well, if you put these things side by side, energy consumption, population, GDP, and carbon emissions, it's a pretty familiar pattern. So what could be wrong with all of this? We're getting more stuff, more powerful, more population, more control over nature. Well, it was a bargain with the devil because it all depended on fossil fuels, which are depleting finite resources. And as we burn them, we release carbon emissions, changing the climate and making it harder for future generations and other species to persist. So we've been aware for some time that climate change is a problem, and the scientists who study this are telling us that we have to decarbonize our economy very quickly, totally by 2050 or even sooner. But what does that actually mean? Can we do that? I've been studying this for many years. I collaborated on a book on the subject called Our Renewable Future. And our conclusion from that study was, it's possible on the drawing board, on the laboratory shelf, but in the real world, not so much. One problem is that solar and wind produce electricity, which is great. Electricity is a very useful energy carrier, but we only use 20% of our energy in the form of electricity. The other 80% we use in form of liquid, solid, gaseous fuels. So when you hear that a particular company or community is going 100% green energy, usually what that means is 100% renewable electricity. A lot of that coming from hydro usually. But that other 80% is just ignored. That's energy, but we use words so imprecisely. We should be if we mean electricity, we should talk about electricity. Why? Because there's a lot of things that are going to be very difficult to electrify. Like this is a cement kiln that produces cement for concrete. Concrete is literally the foundation of modern industrial society. You need it for building wind turbines, for example. And this is how you make cement in kilns that operate at 1500 degrees Celsius 24/7. Can you do that without fossil fuels? Again, in principle, yes, on the drawing board, in the laboratory, but in the real world, we're very, very far away from being able to do that. Same thing with aviation, shipping, I could go on. Then there's the materials requirements for building, not just the solar panels and the wind turbines themselves, but all that infrastructure. Remember, 80% of the infrastructure that we have depends on solid, liquid, gaseous fuels, not just on electricity. So a lot of that infrastructure is going to have to be replaced with stuff that does rely on electricity, or with infrastructure that makes and uses synthetic fuels. So that means we're going to have to extract raw materials at much higher rates than we have in the past. So scale is really the biggest hurdle to an energy transition. I'm not dissing solar and wind here. I'm not saying it's a waste of time and it's a terrible thing and we should get rid of all the solar panels. No, we need alternative forms of especially electricity production to maintain some vestige of electrical grids. Because if we can't keep some level of grid electricity, then everything goes. Civilization grinds to a halt and billions of people die very soon. I don't want that to happen. So, but can we replace all of our energy usage? Can we continue living the way we do today? Taking vacations in the Bahamas and all the rest? No, it's not going to happen. Despite rapid growth of solar and wind, and like last year, we had the fastest growth of solar and wind in all of history, 10% growth. And yet we also set a record with the highest greenhouse gas emissions last year. So how can that be? It's because of economic growth. We're constantly demanding more energy, and the growth in energy usage is outpacing the addition of solar and wind power. So renewable energy is just adding to, it's not actually displacing energy from fossil fuels, at least yet. The only way really we're going to decarbonize the economy is to directly reduce fossil fuel usage, stop producing this stuff and stop using it. And currently that's 85% of our energy. So of course, if we stopped altogether tomorrow, 85% of our energy would go away, and so would civilization. So we've got to do this in some kind of organized manner. But climate change is not the only thing that's going on. As a result of having so much power, we're also seeing we're using more land. So land use is resulting in destruction of habitat for other species. We're losing wild nature. 70% of the populations of most species populations, whether we're talking about birds, mammals, amphibians, fish, have seen a 70% decline in population in the last 50 years. So nature's just disappearing in front of us. We're depleting resources, polluting the environment, and economic inequality is growing. So what we need to do, obviously, is limit some of this overuse of power on the part of human beings that fossil fuels has enabled. Are we even capable of power self-limitation? Well, yes, in principle we are, and I go into that in some detail in the book. I even give it a new name, the optimum power principle, because you see it everywhere in nature. With predators, over time, they adjust themselves to the abundance of prey species available to them. So rather than killing all of the prey and making it impossible for themselves to survive, they actually reduce their predation to the point where there's a more or less stable relationship between predator and prey species. Indigenous societies did this all the time. And the best way to understand it, the word indigenous, is a society of people that has stayed in one place for long enough to learn the rules of nature in that place. the limits to resources, wastes, and so on. And so indigenous societies should be our teachers. They are the people who know what we need to know, what the rest of us need to know. And so what we need to be doing is learning from them and helping them to survive so that we can learn for them. We limit power in all kinds of ways. Nature limits power, as I've just said. Traditional societies did so. Even in the modern world, we do it with democracy and financial regulations and arms treaties and so on. So if we can limit our power, and we do, and there are lots of things that we must limit ourselves if we're going to survive this century: resource extraction, waste dumping, energy usage, land use, all these things. If we can do it, and those are the things we need to limit, why aren't we doing it? Well, there are a lot of reasons I could go into, but I think the key is just that we've gotten so much power so fast from fossil fuels that we took it personally. We said, oh, we must be really smart, we human beings. And if we can have it, we must deserve it. And we should assume that future generations will have even more. And of course, the economic system that we've created throughout this time, which we call capitalism, it demands more growth. So we've developed this kind of Star Trek mentality. And I used to enjoy watching Star Trek and the great characters and stories and everything. But you think about what is it actually about? It's about human beings in the future colonizing the rest of space. Wait a minute. It hasn't worked out so well just on this little planet. So shouldn't we get this little planet in order before we start telling other planets what to do? So what's the future of power? What does it look like the rest of this century? I think there's a spectrum of possibilities, but it's a bounded spectrum, right? From collective self-annihilation to sufficient self-restraint. What you will normally hear from most economists and politicians and so on is, well, we're just going to continue to grow population and consumption throughout the rest of this century. Technology, AI, all the rest is going to make it possible to do absolutely everything. We'll be colonizing other planets and so on. I don't think that's a realistic possibility this century. Either we're going to get ourselves in order so that we're living within the limits of this planet, or it's all just going to fall apart for us. And it's already starting to do so, and it's going to start doing so much, much faster. So what to do? Well, we've got to fight vertical power with more horizontal power, voluntarily cooperating and coordinating, building a kind of green resistance movement that includes ecosystem protection and restoration, indigenous rights, anti-war movements, building community resilience, building trust among each other by living with wisdom, integrity, courage, and compassion. We have a duty to each other and to the natural world. And the natural world isn't here just for us to plunder. We have a responsibility to it. So what this really amounts to is a kind of managed retreat from the pinnacle that industrial civilization has taken us to. It's important, I think, to start with food because that's what we all need. It's our connection with the land. It's critically important for survival, and it's going to be impacted by climate change and all the other things that are going on. So to finish, some words from my favorite philosopher, the Chinese Taoist Lao Tzu. Knowing others is intelligence, but knowing yourself is wisdom. Mastering others is strength, but mastering yourself is true power. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, for kicking off the program in such a powerful way and grounding us in that reality of the weight in which this industrial society and civilization, it makes us expand in ways that are detrimental to our survival, but I'd also say it limits our imagination in a lot of ways. So creating that space for horizontal community power is critical. So we're going to open up space for Q&A. If folks have any questions, please feel free to jump in the chat or use the raise hand function and be ready to unmute yourself. And I think I'm going to get some help. I see one hand up from Timothy. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Richard, thank you for an excellent summary. You mentioned the role of war in all of this, but only sort of in passing. I actually myself have come to conclude that it plays a much more central role. And for historical documentation of that fact, I refer you to Matthew Ozano's epic tome, Oil, Power, and War, A Dark History, where he documents the role of oil in winning wars over the 20th century primarily. The point is that what we need to do right now quite clearly is essentially reallocate all fossil fuel use only for the most essential needs, which most people would agree are food production, as you've mentioned, and also the building out of a renewables electricity grid as fast as possible. That means, in particular, nobody else gets it, and that means that the military doesn't get it. And that is tantamount to unilateral disarmament. Right. And as the federal budget itself shows, if nothing else, the military is really the puppet masters behind American politics and indeed global, much of what goes on around the world. I hate to say this, but I think we're not going to be able to do that massive reallocation without dealing with the use of war as a means of solving international disputes. Any comments?
Yeah, I share all of your concerns. And that's why I, when I, in one of the last slides, described the sort of deep green resistance movement, I put the anti-war movement as part of that, because if you game out how the century is likely to unfold, as resources become more depleted and as population continues to grow, if it does, the likely result will be more resource wars, fighting to see who will control the last of the available fossil fuels, water, minerals, and all the rest. If we don't want to go that way, then it's going to require people power, horizontal power to challenge the masters of war, not just in this country, but in all countries. Because as you say, if it's just unilateral disarmament, the end result of that is the countries that don't go down that path of disarmament will just conquer the ones that do.
Actually, that's not quite true. We have nuclear weapons, and they don't take that much fossil fuels to keep them going. Nobody's going to attack us while we have those, if they're sane.
Right. Yeah. Well, we also need to de-weaponize nukes. These are weapons that, by their very nature, could themselves, bring most of life on Earth to a close. So, yeah,
I agree. But my point was that immediately we don't have anything to worry about, even if we did destroy our conventional forces. Right. We would be quite well protected.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's an important subject, and it needs to be part of the conversation. I agree.
Absolutely. I want to bring Homer into the dialogue here. Homer, over to you. I see your hand up, and you're muted.
Oh, there we go. Hi, Homer Walden here. I'm the low-tech farmer. Louise invited me to this podcast, and it's really great. Thank you for having it. And thank you for asking me to. I probably have more of an answer than a question. I started farming about 20 years ago using pigs to till out my garden beds. I was given the Governor's Award in Pennsylvania for environmental excellence by not using a drop of fossil fuels. So naturally, this podcast has gotten my attention, and I just wanted to share you know, how I actually do that. And I put a couple of pigs in a movable pen and I feed them waste from the produce stand. So they eat all this waste, they till up the garden beds, I move the pen, and then they start the cycle all over again. And at the end of 120 days, I'm harvesting these vegetables that the pigs planted, and I've got free food. And I don't have to buy feed pigs. So it's this crazy little system that I've been working on. And I'm writing a book about it. It's going to be called the Full Circle Farming. I wrote a book last year called The Low Tech Farmer, and that one's available on my website if anybody's interested. But I just wanted to put the word out there that there are solutions. We just have to really work for them. And having these pigs dig my garden beds up and do all the tilling, it really it changes the whole model of what you know, what we're able to do. And it's
Absolutely.
pretty exciting, and it actually works. So
Great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Homer, for your comments. Just again, being mindful of time, darn linear time. I think we're gonna have some really engaging panel discussions focused on that very topic around our food systems and how we work with and relate to the land. So eager to get into that. And again, just being mindful of time and really appreciating you, Richard, again, for grounding us in this recognition of power.